Okay. Well, welcome, friends. Uh, Good to see so many of you on a Saturday morning where you could be still in bed or doing a lot of other things. Our topic today is the language of politics and the soul. How we can connect our souls to the language of politics, and just a few indisputable facts here. And I will be sending out the notes on this. Uh, which will contain much more than I can get to in the 45 minutes. We're the wealthiest nations ever existed on this planet. There's no comparison. Yet, we're the only modern, industrial, post-industrial democracy that does not have health care for all. And In fact, the people who do have health care in our culture, in our country, are paying twice as much for it as people in France or England or Australia. They've all figured this out. The fact that every time somebody mentions, gee, everybody ought to be able to go to a doctor when they're sick, people scream, communism, socialism. We got to understand these terms. Today, we're going to talk about the language. But not only do we not have health care for all, but on this latest great ugly billionaire bill that was passed, in fact, we're cutting coverage for millions of people, mostly the most vulnerable, people on Medicaid, people with disabilities, elderly, and people in care homes that, will not be able to, will lose their coverage. And plus, we're cutting things like Meals on Wheels, USAID, which is helping Haiti and all people all over the world. Money was actually already, appropriated by the Congress, who's the only people who legally can appropriate any money for anybody, and it's all been clawed back. Uh, Education funds all cut. The list goes on and on. If you look at that bill. Meanwhile, in the bill, there's $180 billion for ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That makes it's hard to believe, it makes it the fifth largest military budget on the planet. Ours is, of course, the first, you know. Uh, and we're $180 billion for masked armed agents arresting and deporting people without due process. Now, maybe we could shave that a little bit and give health care to all. Well, we need to find a way to talk about this, because when you really just even look at those things, and there's much more than that. Martin Luther King used to say, you know that what a country's really about how they to treat the most vulnerable, the marginal, you know. And so we need to find a way to talk about this. And that's what I really want to get into today. Uh, trying to, yeah. And I want to go back to Aristotle. It was 1968 when I started reading the great books at Notre Dame. And on the first semester's reading was Aristotle's Politics. And I got to tell you, I was not enthused. I wanted to read something else, but there was one word in there that was very interesting, because Aristotle was trying to say, this was the beginnings of democracy, so called, and and he was writing in Greek, of course, and he said that the whole purpose of politics, and again, politics, the word comes from the word polis, which means city. This was a city state long before we ever had nation states. We had clans, and then we had tribes, and then we had small towns, and and then the actually cities like Athens, where Aristotle was writing from. And so politics, he thought, was the art of, it was about flourishing of the people. You could tell good politics, if you have a good government, a good political system, the people will flourish just the way if you take care of a garden, it becomes lush. And so flourishing was the key word there. In Greek, it's called eudaimonia. And he said that was the hallmark of politics. It's there for the flourishing of the people. Of course, he meant, sort of rich white guys, just like our founders did. But it's a good term. As a matter of fact, that's my political party now. I'm a eudaimonia. Republicans, Democrats. Well, I'll support anybody who has a plan to help people flourish. It's a lovely word, flourishing. It sounds like flowers and the garden, you know. Uh, so why can't we use our money to help you, me, and just normal people, especially the most vulnerable, flourish? Find out, grow and have the ability to um, find out what unique gifts you have. We've got to imagine a politics of flourishing. When Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge, he wasn't saying that knowledge wasn't important in facts and science. No, he was a scientist, but he said, uh, AI will take you so far. Knowledge will take you so far. We have to imagine a country worth living in. When my daughter set foot in Australia, she had healthcare automatically. She didn't even have her work visa yet set up, but as a tourist, you have healthcare in so many countries. If you have an accident, they'll take care of you because that's their system. Also, she walking her dog at night, she felt safe because not everybody had weapons. In fact, very few people have weapons. Maybe they have a kitchen knife, but they don't have an AR-15. These are things we got to talk about. To talk about anything uh, and to imagine anything, and that's like the two sides of our brain now, the whole brain. To talk about things, you got to use your left brain, but to imagine things, imagination is connected to the right brain and the soul to imagine ways. But first of all, we have to actually know about these words we're throwing around so fast and loose. As soon as Charlie Kirk was assassinated, you know, coming out of the mouth of our president was, oh, this was by the radical left. But what does radical left mean? How many people really know what right and left mean? And so I want to get into that. I want to talk about the vocabulary that we're using. So at least we know what we're talking about. And then, I'm really have faith in communication and in language. If the language is true and it comes from the heart, uh, when the language is false, we're in Alice in Wonderland. The words can mean anything you think. What is a radical left? What does left and right mean? You know, that's what we really need to look in first. And then we'll look at what does the center mean? What does radical mean? What does extreme mean? These are 5, 6 words that I want to try to clarify. And then we have a basis for talking. And then finally, I think we have a basis for understanding how we actually have the power to correct things. Our founders built a system of government with the power to make corrections. That's what the amendments, that's what legislation is about. But we have to understand the terms. So left and right. Most people have no idea what it means. Left and right. Radical leftists killed Charlie Kirk. Well, where does left and right come from? Well, Vivienne might know because it came from the seating arrangement in the French National Assembly in 1789, right before their revolution. The people who sat, and actually there was a barrier, as I read, there's a barrier that kept them physically apart, because things were getting boiling over. And supporters of the monarchy, well, they loved the king and traditional social order called the Ancien Regime. They sat on the right side of the presiding officer. And this group generally favored preserving traditional institutions like the monarchy, aristocracy, and the church. Now, sitting on the left side were those who supported change, revolution. They were, they saw that what the United States was doing, And they said, well, we can do that too. We can have a republic. We can have commoners representing us. You know, there was a few of them, actually common people who weren't aristocrats, were in uh, the sitting on the left side. They advocated for a more democratic, secular society and greater civil liberties. So the right meant status quo, and it meant monarchy, kings, queens, divinely, put on earth by, so the religions that supported all that. And then the left believed in something more democratic where people had more rights. Nobody has any rights in a monarchy, really. And long before the French Revolution actually came around, our concepts and cultures of left and right were already there in the words. The right side, I mean, 9 out of 10 people are right-handed. Why that is, I don't know. But the right side was associated with the dominant right hand and seen as stronger. I'm right-handed. My right hand is stronger than my left. And it was seen, so right was always associated with strength and more, good. The left comes from the Old English lift, which means weak. And even the Latin word for left is sinister, which we have the word. There's something questionable about it. Sinistre, I think, in French, maybe. Vivian, you would know that. So the right is always about order, and the left is sort of like odd or disruptive. Yeah. And actually, in 1789, there were more people sitting on the left side in the French Assembly than on the right. And that momentum uh, carried them into the revolution, violent revolution. Uh, and then, the rest is history. But so at least you realize where the origin of right and left means. Leftist skews always more, they believe in democracy. I believe in democracy. I believe the majority of Americans believe in democracy and the rule of law rather than monarchy and the rule of one man, one woman, a king or a queen. So left and right have always been skewed that way. Now, radical left, radical right, extreme left, extreme right, those are different terms. We'll look at them. But let's talk about centrism in a minute. If you got left and right in the center, what is the center? What are you if you're a centrist? Well, actually, I feel like I'm sort of a centrist. Merton felt he was a centrist. He was criticizing and commenting on both Democrats and Republicans, on both left, right. When Thich Nhat Hanh, for instance, a great Vietnamese master, when he was in Vietnam, and his order was when people got hurt, he didn't care if they're North Vietnamese or South Vietnamese. If people were wounded, his order took care of them. And he was on the death list for both, the enemies list and the death list for both the North and the South. And when the South were in the South Vietnamese were interrogating him, they said, "We know you're for the North." And he said, "No, I'm not for the North." He said, "Well, then are you for us?" He said, "No, I'm not for you." And they said, "Well, who are you for?" He said, "I'm for the center. I'm for anybody who is suffering. We're going to help them." And so, I feel like I'm sort of centrist, although I lean left because I definitely want a democracy. I want a rule of law. Uh, so I'm definitely in that. And you can, a centrist could be somebody who has, but then in certain issues, a centrist might lean right. And for more traditional views. And so the center has a lot of play. There's a lot of people in that center. I think that, on some issues, you want less government regulation, and other issues you feel that government's got to step in. The center people in the center are more for gradual change. They favor gradual change, and I do too. I don't really think real change is evolutionary, including real change in human behavior. It's slow, but it's to be transformative rather than just one party comes in and they throw out a bunch of stuff and then there's wreckage, and then another party comes in, tries to, that's what passes for politics. But in terms of, a centrist believes in sort of real transformation, lasting transformation, and it's slow, it's more evolutionary. And centrists are really more pragmatic. They don't, it's ideology means less than pragmatism. They tend to weigh each issue on its merits, and they rely on evidence for what works. We're in the current administration, evidence-based stuff does not have any sway whatsoever. Whether you're talking about the CDC or even trying to invade cities whose crime rates are going down because we say that they're crime ridden. So that centrists are sort of evidence-based rather than in ideology. But I'd say most people, even if they lean right or left, if they're centrist, they have a commitment to a kind of democracy. Strong advocates for democratic norms, individual rights, the institutions. We're seeing institutions hollowed out now. And so we're right or left from the center. There's a whole lot of people who want those things. Hey, they want a Department of Education. They want evidence-based healthcare. Most people, I think, are either center left or center right. And you sort of balance interests there because you can't agree on all issues. So centrists will try to get a kind of consensus. We almost have none of that now. The budget talks of, the Republicans are leaving town and they're saying, we're not talking to the Democrats, F them. And so that's the nature of what we've got going now. The radical left and the radical right, this word radical needs to be understood in its true sense. Radical means to get to the root of the problem. Radical guys, they want to get to the root of this system. They're usually systems people, and they said they want to change the system, and that's good to look at the systems. Radicalism is extreme only to those who consider the status quo normal and acceptable. I mean, Martin Luther King was called a radical. He was called a lot of other things too. But he was abolitionists during slavery times were called radical. People who advocated for workers' rights, for women's rights were called radical. The suffragettes were called radical. People who advocated for racial justice, people who advocated for, in the labor movement were called radicals and communists and all this stuff. People who advocated for a minimum wage, for an 8-hour day, they were all called radicals at one time. And there is some truth to that, but the radical means, not trustworthy or something, or flaky or dangerous. Well, they're dangerous to the status quo that wanted to have, children in the workplace. They're dangerous to people who want to have people work 60 or 80 hours a week and pay them whatever you want. Radical, the minimum wage. But so we got to understand, radical really means people who went to the roots. Jesus was he was a radical. Buddha was a radical. These are my two favorite human teachers, Jesus and Buddha, and they both went to the root of the problem. That's why Jesus turned over the tables, because they were making money in the temple. Money was running the show. Money runs our government, you got to understand. And so it is radical to look at that system. He overturned the tables. He knew that wasn't going to go well for him. The Buddha overturned the caste system. He was in the highest caste. And yet when he established a monastery, he was the first guy to think, well, a bunch of guys can get in. It was guys in the beginning, but later women had their own. And a bunch of guys could get together and do the most important thing, which is connect to the absolute, to do the meditation. And he actually invented the free lunch. They went out and begged their lunch and taught. They taught some of the truth and they ate whatever anybody gave them. Yeah, radical. invent monasticism. Radical to say he would take what were now called Dalits, but then was called untouchables. Anybody could come into the Buddhist Sangha if you just were willing to go to the root of yourself. Yeah. So radical is not a bad name at all. Radical is actually, you get to the root of the problem. Instead of keep mowing dandelions, you unroot them. You got to dig them up. Weeds keep coming back, you see. So radicals thrown around. The radical left, somebody from the radical left killed Charlie Kirk, came out of the mouths right away. And the radical left in our country would be like democratic socialist. And you say the S word and everybody freaks out and thinks you want to be thinks it's the same as communism. It's not. Democratic socialists want a larger role for the government. And, that would be like, of course, I'm Bernie Sanders, AOC, the guy who's going to be the Democratic mayor probably of New York, Mamdani. These are guys who say the government can't work for the people. We have to follow the law. Okay. Now, radical left or like the libertarians would be a good example. The most high profile one would probably be like Rand Paul and his father Ron Paul. They believe that the government should be less government, and so the individuals can be free. Those are radicals on both sides. But Rand Paul did not vote to authorize this budget because he can see the immense power of the government. The Republicans always were concerned about. They're always a little bit on the sense of the government shouldn't have such a big role in life. The government is just chewing up everything now, and so as a libertarian, he didn't like that. But so you get radicals, you get centrists who lean left and right. All those people, which I'd say is the majority of our 340 million people, they want democracy and they want the rule of law. I think, yeah, and we have to have a language base to talk about it. Now the extreme left and the extreme right mirror one another really. First of all, they believe in violence, and both sides. Both sides. They believe you should shoot somebody if you don't like them. Left or right, they believe in violence, and I don't believe the majority of people. I think we're looking for how do we get out of this incredible violence. We have I don't know, we've had 250 mass shootings already in this year. My daughter feels safe walking the streets of Sydney, walking Greta, because they don't have all these guns. They had their first mass shooting and they collected them all up, except for hunting stuff and whatever. But they don't have AR-15s on the street. We're trying to pass a law to let people carry them openly in D.C. We got to face this kind of that's extreme. Now, extreme left and right, even it could skew as on the right they call it fascism, on the left they call it communism, and we have examples of both in the past and the present. But it's the same thing. It's authoritarian. Even though communism said the people should rule, well, really, it became Stalin, it became Mao. And on the right, Mussolini, Hitler. It's always authoritarian. That word in itself, we need to talk about, I think. One day we had at St. Joe, we had T-shirt day. If we did something, the kids could wear T-shirts, didn't have to wear their uniform. And this one kid came in my 7th grade, and he had a T-shirt on, and he said, he says, I know you'll like this T-shirt, and it said, resist authority, challenge authority is what it said. And he said, I knew you'd like this. I said, well, we got to talk about that a little bit. And he looked at me like he was a little bit let down because he was sure it would be my favorite because of the kind of teacher I was back then. And I said, well, let's look at this part of the gospel here, Gospel of Mark. I taught the Gospel of Mark as a great book, and I got in trouble every time. Just looking at the gospel and asking questions, trying to figure it out. But in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus, his very first political, religious, spiritual healing act is he goes into in Capernaum. He goes to where Peter's town, the town where all the fishermen were. He goes into the synagogue, and there's a raving maniac. They call him a demoniac. You know, he's filled with the demons, and he heals them on the Sabbath when you're not supposed to heal. And he goes right to the center of power and heals them. And what Mark is a fantastic reporter, is the first guy, the first gospel we know of, writing some 30 years after Jesus was crucified on the cross. And but yet this story remained, and so Jesus heals this guy, and then he scans the crowd, and he shows the onlookers saying, "Who is this guy? Who is this guy? He teaches with authority, not like these school rabbis." So there's a total difference between someone who speaks, lives, teaches with authority, and someone who is an authoritarian. And the difference is the direction of power. If you're an authoritarian, all the power comes to one man. You see the big, things of Stalin, the big things of big pictures of Mao all over the place. All the power, whether Jim Jones and your cult down there, all the power goes this way. All the money goes this way too. Even though communism believes everybody deserves equal, it's really not democracy, because some people are more equal than others. Believe me, Stalin and Mao and Putin, etc. It doesn't work that way. All the power and all the money starts funneling towards the leader. That's an authoritarian, and it doesn't matter if you're a fascist or a communist or something else. If it's an authoritarian structure, all the power is in one man or one woman or a few people, and that's either right or left. So that's something about authoritarian. They also both sides, extreme right and extreme left, they believe in violence. They don't believe in democracy, but they also use enemy formation. Goebbels, the propagandist for Hitler, he knew that the quickest way to unite people is to find a common enemy. And so all authoritarians, left and right, they demonize certain populations. In the Nazi regime, they demonized anybody who wasn't blonde and blue-eyed, and at first it was the Jews, and that was the Gypsies, that was anybody with a mental or physical impairment. They were gotten rid of. So enemy formation. We're going to go to war on you. The whole thing was after, and I don't believe this is true at all, that Charlie Kirk was shot. That was a horrible thing. There's no place for violence for most people, and certainly not in politics. But he gets shot, and then, all right, the gloves are coming off. Now it's full-fledged war, and you got this beam, of Trump in apocalypse now, and the Chicapocalypse. He was going to bring war to Chicago. Get ready. He didn't know that much about Chicago, for one thing. Chicago's the home of labor and the home of organization, and one community organizer, besides the fact that the governor and the mayor and all the politicians are saying, no, we don't want troops on the street. That's also something that comes with authoritarianism. You have your own military on the street facing the people. That is unconstitutional. We don't want that. No American wants to have military people pointing guns at them. If you watch, actually, if you watch a video, I just watched the Spike Lee thing that was a retrospective of Hurricane Katrina, and when they finally did send the National Guard in, the head of all of it, the head of the Army, General Honore, when he saw guys holding guns, pointed to it, and he said, "Put those guns down." And he used stronger language than that. He said, "We don't be pointing guns at our own citizen. You're here to help, but these guys have guns drawn." And so the military, bringing military into our cities, that's what authoritarians do. But there's enemies. The enemies now are what? They're people who are undocumented, and there's just this huge drag that they're picking up anybody who looks Spanish, speaks Spanish. But then Korean, all those Korean guys, and then where's that going to stop? If you can have masked men grab you, put you in an unmarked van, and then you disappear, that's kidnapping. That is not American. You have to have a charge. They have to have their day in court. We're doing away with all that. That's authoritarian. But enemies are keen. And so you talk. You don't talk to Republicans if you're a Democrat. They're your enemy and vice versa. Well, that's authoritarian. Okay. And it doesn't matter if it's left or right. We got to talk to one another. We're neighbors on the same block. Okay. So, and then from enemy formation comes dehumanizing language. These people are vermin. They're not human. They're undocumented people. They're vermin. The homeless people. One guy on Fox News said, a homeless person with mental illness, they should just be given an injection and kill him. He's still working for Fox. Jimmy Kimmel made a joke and was a little bit off on it. Yank him. And that's going on too. An authoritarian will control the media, and it becomes a state media. And you see ABC, NBC, CBS, all doing that. And so you realize that really, and their opinions, Jimmy Kim, comics have always and criticized leadership. They made jokes about Biden. They make jokes about Obama. That's what they do. They're critical. And now we're pulling these guys off the air. Colbert, Kimmel, I'm coming for the rest of you guys. Okay. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. That's authoritarianism in whatever form, left or right. And they use the dehumanizing language. If these people are, you can't put people in the ovens. You can't do horrible things to people. You can do it to vermin. They called the Jews vermin. They weren't human. They were like rats. Okay. So it's always a cult. There's a leader that everything I ever said was true. You can have it on your baseball cap. That's classic cult leadership. But all the power, all the money goes into a very small few hands in either left or right. It doesn't matter. And the important thing to realize is I remember watching why are there no troops in Chicago? You all promise all this. Why not? Well, they held a press conference. I watched the whole press conference because I'm from the South Side, and Chicago was my city, and I like Chicago a lot. And the thought of a bunch of what went on in L.A. happening, so I was watching the press conference, and one community organizer said, "You can demonize us, you can terrorize us, but we're going to organize," and that's what they've done. They've organized the people. They organize people in the areas where they're just picking up people in the Latino areas, in the Koreatown, in Chinatown, on the west side of Chicago in general, and where the poorest people live, the darker people who are not white. Yeah, so racism goes with both too, you see. Racism goes with it. Sure. You know why we don't have health care for all? Because that was the last part of when Roosevelt died and Truman took over. His job was to complete the New Deal, which was that we would have universal health care. Well, the Democrats in the South, the Dixiecrats, bolted on it, and they basically said, "Well, if we have health care for all, you might be in a hospital with a Negro." And so they use racism. So racism is always part of it. You're the master race. The Russians, just Jews. We don't want these other people. That's where Buber freaked out when he fled Nazi Germany and went to Israel, and he saw they were doing the same thing. to the Arab people, to the Palestinians, and he worked his whole life to try to say, no, these are our brothers and sisters. That was the sense of the I thou that he was trying to preach. When somebody becomes a it, you can do anything to them. So it's I it. You can do anything to an it. It's not a thou. It's not a person. You see, and so racism comes into it too. So all these things are working in there, and it's all not so much under the surface now. And it's a question: do you believe that? And I'd say most of the 340 million people are not for that. They want a democracy. They want people to be treated. I think most people, 95% of Americans, when do you get 95% of Americans to agree on anything? They want gun legislation. They want to take automatic weapons off the street. Don't you? Uh, I do. And yet it's not done. We got to talk about this. We got to be able to communicate. We got to be able to organize. And you can't organize people if you think they're your enemies, you see. Yeah, it just doesn't work. So that's where the language is important. And that's where truth is important. And that's why this is heart to heart because uh, there's part of you that knows the part of you that knows the truth is what we call the heart. It's what the Sufis called the hal. Doesn't matter. Everybody has a word for something deeper that knows what's true, and yet you look the other way. And now also the final thing that we're dealing with on an authoritarian, either left or right, extreme left or right, authoritarians, they try to get people to be afraid to speak up, to stand up. And you see people in American cities now getting arrested because they're standing up to protect their neighbors and they're getting nabbed and arrested too. So to stand up and speak up. So we're taking these guys who are speaking up, comics, and we're getting rid of them. You think it's going to stop at comics? And so, uh, you know, uh, the signs are here, and we really need to understand the language. We got to understand the difference between a strong leader and an authoritarian. And uh, and you got to decide what kind of country you want. Because if we just sort of let it happen, you know, uh, it's going to get worse than it is now, and it is getting worse. And things will get worse before they get better. But I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope. And my poem tomorrow, and I'm going to end with my poem tomorrow. My poem tomorrow is that I've had a burr under my saddle for uh, 4 years now. When they say, when Ron DeSantis, who's just a Trump imitator, Trump wannabe, authoritarian wannabe, he says, Florida is where woke comes to die. This whole idea of woke ideology. And I'm sitting in front of the Buddha and Jesus, the Buddha, the Buddha meant the guy who woke up. They said, "Who are you?" Both Jesus and Buddha got this same question. Who are you? Not what are you? What do you do? They said, who are you? They were so different. They were so awake. And the Buddha simply said, I'm awake. That's what the Buddha means. And we all have, if you're a Buddhist practitioner or you understand Buddhism, you see, Buddhists say we all have this awakening that's at our very center. We can wake up. Well, Jesus, they had different flavors. They worked differently, but Jesus was, the classic story in the Gospels. Uh, he lands. They're crossing the Lake of Galilee and they're doing all this incredible stuff and storms. They think they're going to drown. They come in, and then somebody meets them at the dock, and somebody says, "Hey, he was the great healer." Jesus. Everybody knew Jesus was a healer, and he said, the head of the synagogue, Jairus, the guy who's got all the dough in town, he says his daughter's sick. Go and heal him. And I could see the apostles say, finally, finally we're going to be in with the guys who have the power here. And so, there's a lot of interesting thing that he heals a young woman, who's been bleeding for 12 years. Everybody taking her money. Nobody's healed her. He heals her. And But then he gets there, and the guy says he's going in to heal the young girl. They say, "Hey, don't worry about it. She's already dead." And he grabs Peter, James, and John, which usually are with him when serious stuff is happening. He says, "No, no, that's all right. She's just sleeping." And they all laugh. Mark is great. They're all laughing. They're laughing at Jesus. He says, "So she's just asleep." So he comes in, and who knows really what happens. But what this is one of the only two times in all the things that they actually used the language Jesus spoke, and that was Aramaic. And he says, "Talitha cum," and that somehow that whole story, and especially the Aramaic, that the other bit of Aramaic in some of the Gospels is he says it on the cross, but he says Talitha cum. Talitha means young girl or maiden, and cum means rise up, wake up, because he said she was asleep, and then she came to. Maybe she was in a coma. We don't know, but she awakens. He says, "All right, give her something to eat." So he woke up everybody, even the dead. These are two wokesters here. And so this is a poem that it's going to be out tomorrow, but I'll include it in the notes. And I think it's a good way to end here. Uh, this is called Blessed Are the Woke. And it's dedicated to Siddhartha, which was the Buddha's first name, and to Yeshua, which was Jesus's name. Jesus is the Greek for Yeshua. Joshua in English would be the closest. But so this is dedicated. It's really after living for my whole life with these two wokesters. So blessed are the woke. And when we come back, we'll hear it again in terms of a way to learn how to sit and wake up sitting. Being aware in this moment, just as it is how we practice listening and looking deeply into the heart of life. Being aware in this moment, just as it is how we water the seeds of wisdom, compassion, mercy, and joy. Being aware in this moment, just as it is how the God in me can greet the God in you no matter what. Being aware in this moment, just as it is how woke folk live by aspiring to love God and their neighbor as themselves. Yeah, and we'll use that when we come back in 15 to do our second sitting. And I'm going to put on in the interval a yard sign that I've bought. It hasn't arrived yet, but I'll put the yard sign on, and I'll put it up now, and then we can end the. I want the people looking on the people who are on YouTube to see this yard sign. You don't have to come to Loosely Follow to see it, but I got to find it first. And we'll end with this. Okay. Takes a little bit of technology to show everybody all over the world this yard. It's my favorite yard sign. I hope it comes today. Love your neighbor who doesn't look like you, who doesn't think like you, who doesn't love like you, who doesn't speak like you, who doesn't pray like you, who doesn't vote like you. Love your neighbor, no exceptions. I think that's gospel. That's good enough there, Cheryl. Thanks. Thank you all for listening.